What's going on, guys? It's Jimmy here. So Russia has now confirmed some details here from the plane crash. Take a listen here.
We turn now to the latest news on Wagner mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. Russian authorities this morning have confirmed the death of the Russian mercenary leader in a plane crash last week following genetic testing conducted at the crash site. U.S. officials are saying that based on their preliminary intelligence reports, sabotage likely brought down the aircraft. This, of course, comes just 2 months after Prigozhin led a rebellion against Russia's military before an agreement was reached that exiled the mercenary leader to Belarus. Russian President Vladimir Putin offered his, quote, sincere condolences after the crash, saying the mercenary led a complicated life and, quote, made some serious mistakes. The Kremlin on Friday denied having anything to do with it, but President Biden responded to the incident saying, quote, there's not much that happens in Russia that Putin is not behind.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of people say here what Dmitry Alperovich has to say here. Let me know your thoughts on this. Take a listen here.
It's just remarkable.
You're exactly right, Andrea. And I have to say, like, the one critical thing to understand in Putin is that he's not really running a country. He's running a massive mafia state. And it's often, if not always, about money.
And just finally, how brazen this was. Russian airspace, clearly, a worldwide focus on this. Every spy agency, the Brits, ours, everybody is going to be trying to find out what they can about the circumstances of the so-called crash. And the fact that it was, a catastrophic event. This was not some small mechanical failure.
Well, just like in The Godfather, sending messages is important, not just to Prigozhin, obviously, he is dead now, but to any of his associates and any others that may think that Putin does not have ultimate control and the Kremlin doesn't have ultimate control of what business is allowed to be continue to be held by oligarchs, or what business is going to be taken by the Kremlin because it decides that it wants it.
Retired Army General David Petraeus says the same thing, that Prigozhin's killing shows that Russia is a mafia state. And I was surprised it took this long. That go against Vladimir Putin, do anything against his liking, and you will simply either go missing or be killed in public. We've seen this also with scientists being pushed off the roof. We've seen this actually in China as well, as the scientist in, you can see the headline here, do Wuhan Institute of Virology scientists often fall from building roofs? Well, apparently in China they do. So again, you see China, Russia, North Korea, they simply do things differently over there. So, don't talk about the countries over there, or else you simply might either go to prison and never come back out, or, we've seen this from the journalists over there as well. What comes to mind here are, these American journalists that go over to Russia and, they get imprisoned for like 10 years, 20 years for the minor things. You think about Olympic gold medalist Brittany Griner, who got imprisoned for years, or she was going to be imprisoned for years for some hash oil. And literally just political games. And they were probably never going to release her if they didn't trade for her. And you also think about former Marine Paul Whelan, who is still in prison there and might not ever get out. You gotta think about this stuff. And there's still many Americans that travel to China each year. And be aware. That is not something to take lightly, even if you're on a cruise or something like that. And something that Russia always does is they always, feed the other side of it. Kremlin, you can see the headlines here. The Kremlin rejects allegation that they were behind the Prigozhin crash, saying, quote, it was absolute lies. They would never be behind something like that. And, there's a lot of people that believe this, saying, oh, how could we ever be behind that? And remember, this plane came out of Moscow. And I mean, who would even have, how would it be unlikely for anybody else to do this inside Moscow? I mean, think about this. Think about the odds of this. I mean, sure, I guess it's feasibly possible, but think about the odds of that, right? I mean, this guy just did a coup attempt against Russia. And remember, Vladimir Putin was also, and Russia was also the people who said that they wouldn't invade Ukraine. We'll go back to some headlines here. February 2022, Ukraine crisis. Putin says he does not want war in Europe. Why Putin won't invade Ukraine. U.S. ramps up Ukraine warnings as Russia denies invasion plans. Russia insists it won't start a war in Ukraine. Read these headlines, guys. Let's go back a year and a half ago. Russia insists it won't start a war in Ukraine. Again, coming from the mouths of a liar, right? They won't start a war in Ukraine. Seeks to tone down invasion rhetoric from the U.S. Oh, yeah. All that invasion rhetoric from the U.S., that's just rhetoric. They won't do that. Putin's spokesman, Russia won't invade Ukraine unless, quote, it's provoked. Oh, yeah. Ukraine, this is all the, the bullshit from Russia, right? Russia President Vladimir Putin's spokesman pledged Tuesday, a year and a half. This is back from November of 2021. Russia's spokesman pledged that his country will not launch a war with Ukraine, but he warns of threats from Kyiv that may require military action. Yeah, and here we are, a year and a half, 2 years later, actually, from that 2021 article almost. Well, we'll say a year and a half. Moscow says 700,000 children from Ukraine conflict zones have been taken from Ukraine and are now in Russia. Literally just taken from their families. Just stolen from these families and are now in Russia. Let me know what this reminds you of in the comment section. I know what this reminds me of. This literally reminds me of World War II, and the Holocaust, Hitler, Germany. This is Moscow saying this. Here's what they said. Yeah, this was on July 3rd. Russia has brought some 700,000 children from the conflict zones in Ukraine into Russian territory. Head of the International Committee in the Federation Council, Russia's upper house of parliament, said late on Sunday back in July, in recent years, 700,000 children have found refuge with us. Again, this is Russia's idea of refuge, stealing children from their families, their mother and their fathers, and taking them what they call re-education camps, fleeing the bombing and shelling from the conflict areas that, okay, now remember that the bombing and the shelling is coming from Russia, is coming from Vladimir Putin. So remember, Vladimir Putin, you could just not bomb and shell the families and the babies. You could just not bomb them. You could just not invade them, like you said you weren't. Remember the headlines we just seen? Vladimir Putin says he won't invade Ukraine. Russia says they're not going to invade Ukraine. And now fast forward a year and a half later, they've taken 700,000 children from their families. I mean, if you read the Bible, if you've ever gone to Sunday school, if you've ever gone to church, just kind of put this stuff into perspective. Oh, we won't invade this country. Now he's invaded this country, and now they've taken 700,000 children from their families. I mean, this is like life-changing stuff for millions of children and their families. I mean, think about this. This is just like the worst of the worst of the worst. And now you can kind of see why the rest of the world has to step in. Like, this is like Hitler's 2.0 stuff. And remember that, like, the U.S. didn't want to step in World War II right away. Like, they didn't step in right away until they got bombed in Pearl Harbor, okay? And Hitler continued to take over country after country after country after country until they were forced to be stopped by the rest of the world, okay? And you can kind of put that into perspective here with what Putin is doing, or what some people call him Putler, because he's taken over Crimea. He's basically taken over Belarus. Belarus is basically a Putin hub, okay? He was trying to take over Ukraine. It was a bit more than he could chew because the rest of the world stepped in. That was 40 to 45 million people, a massive, massive territory. And they've also leaked plans to take over Moldova. So you got to kind of put into perspective all these different countries that Putin wants to take over one by one by one by one. And think, if the rest of the world doesn't step in, how many children, hundreds of thousands of children that Russia just admitted, Russia just said 700,000 children have found refuge with us. This is coming from Russia, fleeing the bombing and sheltering from the conflict areas in Ukraine that Russia has caused, that Russia has started, that Russia is continuing to do. So Russia's bombing and sending missiles and still doing, and then they're stealing children and saying, oh, we're saving these children because we're bombing them. And how many of them have died in the process? Russia has launched a full-scale invasion of Western neighbor Ukraine in February 2022. Moscow says its program of bringing children from Ukraine into Russian territory is to protect orphans and children abandoned in the conflict zones. What they really mean is taking them from their families and sending them into what Russia calls re-education camps. However, Ukraine says many children have been illegally deported, and the United States says thousands of children have been forcibly removed from their homes. This is also why the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands, in The Hague, has filed arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and Maria Belova after an extensive investigation and proof. And actually, Vladimir Putin and Maria Belova actually admitted in their own kind of announcements and speeches that they have taken children into their country. Again, also with that other previous article I just showed you, they actually said they took 700,000 children into their country, like they were doing these children a favor, but they actually admitted that they took them from their families. Again, the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and Maria Belova, Russia's commissioner for children's rights, because they stole these children from their families. The 123 member states and countries are obliged to detain and transfer Vladimir Putin and Maria Belova if either of them sets foot on any of these 123 countries or member states, because they literally stole tens of thousands of children and committed war crimes. And they admitted it. Let me know your thoughts on this, guys, but I mean, they literally admitted it. I'll keep you up to date here. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe down below, like, and share this video so other people know about this. People need to know about this. Yeah. Click here. You won't believe what banks are doing now, or Russia says they have no other choice but World War III. Click on one of those videos next. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.